Hey, everybody, welcome to the Sky Lounge podcast, episode number 184. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Follow me at the Sky Lounge on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Google Music, and also check out the Sky Lounge on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And without further ado, let's get shit started with episode number 184, February 4th, 1960 to June 20th, 2018, year two. Like I mentioned in the, way end of yesterday's episode, that I was going to talk about my dad today. And it's been 2 years since my dad passed. And he was 58 when he passed away in 2018. And, it's curious. Every time I mention my dad to somebody who doesn't, know that situation, that he passed away, it's almost an instantaneous freak out for people. Like, oh my God, somebody died in your immediate life. Like, yeah, motherfucker, people died. Like, I'm sorry. I mean, it might be a very cruel way to see it, but that's a part of life, right? But of course, because it's my own father, I mean, it is a very difficult topic at times. But, I'm going to be very honest, and I tell this to people all the time. I love my dad. I mean, present tense. I mean, I feel like he's still a part of me, and he is. But I didn't always like him. Like that's the truth. I didn't always like him because he was a fucking dick. I mean, if anybody out there actually met my dad before and have had a personal relationship with him, all right, like myself, you would understand that this man was horrible in social situations. I mean, the arrogance he would just fucking strut with nothing to back him up was astounding at times. And listen, the reality is I totally take after him. there are certainly parts of me in terms of behavior and personality that is very much my father. And Jesus Christ, because we were so similar, we fought a lot. I mean, we fought a lot, man. It was rough. I can only imagine my mom's perspective, just being in the middle, trying to mediate between two real just knuckleheads, in the two men that she loves, her son and her husband. So, when I was younger, I would hear my mom make these complaints like, dude, can you just like chill the fuck out? And I would imagine she would say the same thing to my dad. But, in my kind of bullishness, in my similar sort of arrogance, I would never back down. I had a set philosophy and personality and style about going about things. And my dad wasn't really catering to that part of me. And I remember just being frustrated for so many fucking things about my dad throughout the years. And looking back on it now, it's such petty fucking issues. But when you're in the thick of it, and when you're a kid, you want to voice your own shit. And at times, when you have a very old school traditional Korean parent, man, it's it's not a fun ride. I'll tell you that shit right now, man. There have been times where, like, I wanted to strangle this guy. Like, you have no idea when he would say some shit, and with almost no evidence, no logic, just, I'm your dad, this is it. And I'd be frustrated. I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? And as soon as I get that attitude on, it's automatically, I'm your fucking dad. What the hell is wrong with you? But, I say all that, but my dad wasn't, physically abusive or any of that shit. He wasn't, like, straight up. There's a lot of Asian parents who, boast about beating their children. I think my dad probably, smacked my calves with a shoehorn, when I was a lot younger, probably once or twice. But Yeah, I don't really remember him, going about the punishment. I think my mom was more into that shit. And it was always the shoehorn. I got it easy. I know a lot of Asian kids got fucking like bamboo sticks and shit, but I got fucking those thick ass long shoehorns, which in all honesty, they don't really fucking hurt, man. But when you're a kid, you make sure that shit is like next level hurt. But it's not like a fucking American family where, they hit you or some shit and you fucking cry about social services. That's not how that shit works in the Asian household, or specifically in a Korean household, all right? You get your fucking calves beat with a shoehorn, you're fucking crying and whimpering back to the fucking bathroom and then crawling, back to bed. I mean, not literally crawling because they're not going to fucking kill you with the goddamn shoehorn, but you know what I mean? It still aches and shit. But wow, son, you're really getting in depth with Asian child rearing. Yeah, dude. I'm just letting you know it on my kind of personal story with my parents, and it's to show you that they weren't these fucking stereotypical child beaters. Okay, they were just two young adults trying to figure out their own lives while raising a kid. I can recognize that now. Years later, thinking about the fact that I moved to this country when I was 6 in 98. And, my parents still, barely in their 30s? Barely in their 30s, coming to a country they don't know, still trying to figure themselves out because of, just the general traditional way of Korean lifestyle. It must have been just super frustrating for them. And they fought all the time. And I think for me, what I got out of that was always that, my dad was always on the wrong side, that my mom was always right. But again, years later, you realize that, they're just two human beings trying to figure their shit out. And it's not about right or wrong. It's about trying to, I suppose, reach a compromise for creating an ecosystem within the family for, long-term sustainability, right? So that you don't face any sort of divorce or any sort of craziness. And, I have to, again, give a shout out to my parents because they did that for me, for 20 some odd years in this country. And even before that in Korea. So, as much as I, shit on my dad, like I know he was a good dad. Like he was a good father. But of course, he and I didn't agree on a lot of fucking things. Let's just say that he and I didn't agree on a whole lot of fucking things. So three major things, that were like always issues that we were butting heads with was post-college plans, career plans, and marriage plans. All right, so let's talk about the post-college plans. So I went to UNLV here in Las Vegas, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I remember my dad, when I got admitted to, UNLV, told him that I might go to political science. He was just telling me, just figure your shit out, but I would recommend you just go to law. And he was a big proponent of me going into legal studies for a long time. I mean, in high school, in ATech, Advanced Technologies Academy, I did study legal studies. And the whole idea was that maybe, you continue that trend in college and eventually get to law school and study corporate law. So because the idea was that pathway to corporate law, I ended up becoming a business major, specifically international business with a focus on economics and Japanese culture. What a fucking mouthful, but yeah, that's what I settled for in college, and I graduated, and I took a year and a half off of everything. I just went kind of, mole man mode, in the house, doing absolutely nothing, going to the gym once in a while, but it was a year and a half of just doing nothing. And I remember my dad, getting on my ass, almost every fucking day. Like, hey, when are you going to study for your LSATs? the standardized testing to get into law school. So he kept badgering me and badgering me and badgering me like, yo, you should fucking take your LSATs. You take the LSAT, take the LSAT. And I remember at that point of like a year and a half of like not doing anything, I was at the cusp of that realization that I don't want to go to law school. I'm like, straight up, I don't want to go to law school. I don't want to be stuck in school for 3 more fucking years, reading and trying to analyze shit that I don't really give a shit about, and eventually go to a career path that I had no desire for. And it took me a couple of years to realize that. I mean, I thought since I was a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer. And that was something that my dad really pushed on me when I was younger. And it kind of carried through all the way through high school. But in college and that year off, it just kind of made me realize that, you know what? I don't want to go into legal studies. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to do any of that shit. That sounds awful. And that's when I started working. That's when I started working at Macy's as a receiving associate, making minimum wage. But in my eyes, it was money. And I was super thrilled that I was actually making money. But at that point, my dad just saw my post-college plans just completely out the window. Like he thought I burned that shit down, which I did. I mean, in fairness, I did. I mean, I did take the LSAT at one point within that year and a half break, completely fucking bombed that shit. I completely bombed the LSAT. I'll let you fuckers know that right now. The LSAT and I did not get along at all. I didn't study shit for the LSAT. I just went in there assuming that I was going to do okay, but the reality was I got the wrong edition of prep material, which was about like 5 or 7 years behind what was actually the standardized versions now. So I completely fucking bombed the shit out of the LSATs. And I remember my dad was just like, this kid's, I'm pretty sure the thought process in his head was like, dude, this kid's a fucking idiot. At the same time, like he can pick up certain things, but he's a fucking idiot. What the hell is he doing? And yeah, that post-college plan of going to law school was completely out the window by the time I was working. And my dad eventually realized that. I think he eventually realized that I don't want to do any of that legal study shit. And I didn't want to be a lawyer. And it took him, I think, a while to just kind of embrace that idea. And I know for a fact, like, it was killing him. Like, I've seen it. I've seen him talk to me about, my future, of what he wanted from me. And I told him, I mean, it was several conversations. It wasn't just one instance where I told him off, like, no, I'm not going to fucking become a lawyer. Fuck that shit. But it was multiple conversations where we had these, I suppose you go from just random, regular topic, just casual talk, to him just pirouetting that shit into a fucking lecture about, life, all this shit and what you're going to do with your career. Typical parent shit. And again, multiple times I was telling him, like, I don't want to fucking do this. I find no joy at all in that field, and I have no intention of going back to school. And once he kind of just accepted that in terms of my career plans, he kind of sat silently and reluctantly accepted it. But I think as we both got older, I mean, we both became very understanding. I understood why he wanted the path into law school and legal studies and becoming a lawyer for me, because it was a very safe way to, make money, make a career. And it's something that his father, my grandfather, pushed on him when he was a kid. And so my dad, I guess, not really having that culture connection with me, was really pushing that idea for security and consistency. But again, it wasn't for me. And to be fair, I didn't explain myself all that well back then, and either Korean or English. So there was that disconnect between us. There was. Consistently there was. And the other big thing, aside from the post-college plans and the career plan, that I completely disagreed with, was the marriage plan. The marriage plans. Holy fuck. My dad flat out said, listen, you're going to marry a Korean girl. You're going to have beautiful Korean babies. And I told him, like, I don't want to marry a Korean person. I don't. Somebody who's lived here for, over 2 decades in this country of the United States. I don't really find my similar race all that attractive. And that's just the honest truth. And, obviously, it depends on the person, of course, but generally speaking, that's just my kind of preference. And, when we were having this conversation, okay, the specific conversation, and I remember the day. I remember the day when we had this conversation. I was still working at Macy's, and my dad picked me up because I wasn't driving. My dad picked me up, and again, we're just driving back home, and he's telling me, listen, man, you're gonna marry a Korean girl, have beautiful Korean babies. And he was already, talking about law school, going, becoming a lawyer. So it was all the fucking conversation tied in together. And I didn't want to fucking, destroy the man. So I just picked apart the fucking marriage thing. He's like, you're going to marry a beautiful Korean woman. I was like, no. Ooh, stop right there. Stop right there. No. No Asians. And he freaked out like, what? I'm like, well, Dad, like, I'm not going to just settle for a Korean woman. Like, that's just not my preference. And oh man, he kind of went off a little bit. Like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, so what are you going to marry? Like a white or Hispanic, or, God forbid, a black woman? I'm like, Jesus, dude. Like, what the fuck? Like, relax, man. Fucking relax. Whoa. And I think that kind of freak out mentality that he had, I think really kind of drove me when I finally got laid, of like, not just, sleeping with an Asian woman. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you, I kind of buffeted myself a little bit during a good stretch when I was just, pounding it, quote unquote. And I hate saying that shit. It's awkward saying that shit, man. I don't like to boast about that too much. I don't like boast about getting laid and shit. It's nothing all that fucking fancy. It's just sex, dude. All right. But the funny thing is, I don't think my dad knew I had sex. I think my dad, until the day he passed, thought I was a virgin. So I don't know. Maybe he knew. Maybe he thought like, oh, he probably got laid, but I don't think he knew. I think he passed knowing that I was a virgin, and I was waiting for the right one and shit. But no, none of that shit happened. And sex is sex. It's only one aspect of interpersonal relationships and intimacy. So, obviously, it's still a huge component of an interpersonal relationship, but it's not the only aspect, and that's something that I discovered through my own journey. But man, my dad and I just would clash on all these ideas because different generation, all those similar personalities, but different style of going about things. But despite all of our schisms, there was one commonality, and it was sports. And for years, for fucking decades, I hated sports. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Look at this shit around me right now. I got fucking sports ball flags. I got goddamn jerseys. I got the fucking Korean jersey and the goddamn Dodgers jersey. I got fucking Vegas Golden Knights bobbleheads lying up in the fucking back with me. So to get to this point now, it's kind of curious and crazy for me to say that, but I fucking hated sports back then when I was a kid. Especially, when I was younger. My parents try to get me involved with sports and athletics, and I hated it. I just said, fuck that. I want to just play video games and play Legos and toys and WWF figures. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Going outside and playing sports. That sounds crazy. So despite all of that, eventually through the years, I saw how much sports affected my dad. And I saw that in full blast in 2002 when we lived in LA and we were watching the World Cup. And the World Cup was taking place in Korea. And, when you're living in Los Angeles Pacific Standard Time, it's about what, a 14, good Lord, is it like a 14-hour difference? Or it's like a 16 plus hour difference from here to Korea in the Pacific Standard Time Zone. So this man was watching fucking soccer games at like 2, 3 in the fucking morning, screaming his fucking head off when I got to school the next day. Well, it wasn't really school, but I wanted to get my goddamn sleep in. Okay, so you see my point here. And that's when I was just fascinated with this idea of, Korean soccer. And that was the year South Korea, despite the fucking cheating, got to 4th place in the World Cup. And I think at that point was when when my fascination with, at least South Korean soccer grew. And each and every World Cup, it was, me and my dad just watching it either together or in separate venues, or always talking about it. But I remember the 2014 World Cup being a very special one, because that was the year, for whatever reason, I felt compelled to really get in depth with the World Cup. And I don't know what really pushed it, but maybe it was the fact that I didn't have a job, I didn't have anything to do, and around January or February, the prospect of the World Cup coming closer, was in full view. So I thought, maybe I should get into it this year. Maybe I should, download ESPN3 on the fucking, I think it was like the Chromecast. Was it the Chromecast at that point, or did I have the Fire Stick? I don't fucking remember. But I said, fuck it. I'm going to lock this in and I'm going to watch every game I can with my dad. And we watched a lot of soccer games together. Although it was kind of frustrating that we saw South Korea just fuck up. Like every goddamn World Cup after 2002, they just never, ever reached that high again. But every time we were watching the World Cup, I felt very close to my dad, because other fucking times we never just sit down and agree on shit. We don't. We can't just sit still and just be, I suppose, cordial in that sense. So, the World Cup was, especially in 2014, was something really special where we're just watching this together. And, I'm just realizing that, yeah, wow, he actually loves this sports shit. Maybe I should get into it and discuss. And that's when, I started watching more sports the months after, picked Arsenal Football Club as my soccer team. And here we are now with my infatuation and love with sports ball. And man, I mean, soccer really was that kind of gateway to everything. And I guess I got to thank my dad for that in a way. And in the same sense, my dad made me really appreciate baseball. I tell you folks right now, I don't really, get into the in-depth stats of baseball, and I don't claim to know like ERAs and whips and all that shit, but I just love watching the fucking sport. And I remember when I was really young, right when I came to this country, Park Chan-ho was a Korean player that played for the Dodgers, and my dad and mom's acquaintance had tickets to go. And I remember just going to the game, and supposedly my mom and dad were telling me, like, I was so excited about it. I was over the moon that we had the opportunity to go. And I after a while, after watching the World Cup and getting infatuated with sports, baseball was something that I picked my dad's brain on a little bit. And it's times like those when we were talking about sports where I felt really close to him. And 2018, the World Cup was happening, and it's crazy because I think I said this story before, or maybe not in specific detail, but I'm going to tell you guys a story right now. Okay. And it's a kind of like crazy roller coaster-ish ride, but ultimately, like, just my relationship kind of summed up with my dad. I remember I went to the Stanley Cup Final, Game 5 in 2018, the Washington Capitals taking on the Vegas Golden Knights. And yes, Alexander Ovechkin and the Capitals, lifted the Stanley Cup in Vegas. And I got to watch the entire ceremony and all these fans just so happy. And the very next day, I was sick. The very fucking next day, I was fucking sick. So I was working at a tech company at that time, and I took about 7 or so days off because I was just dog shit sick. But in the midst of that, the World Cup was happening. So while I'm sick and just churning and turning, I'm watching parts of the World Cup, and at this point in 2018, my dad had suffered 2 strokes, and his hips weren't all that great. And physically, his body was just kind of deteriorating. And, it was one of those things where he had a very difficult time talking. And you can tell that he wanted to say certain things, but like he couldn't grasp the way to say it. But when we talked about soccer, it was like just a fluid language for him and me. We're just talking about like, oh, look at this guy doing this shit, like that's so cool or whatever. And at one point, Korea started playing and they were terrible. And my dad and I were like, dude, fuck Korea. Like they're never gonna fucking do anything in our lifetime. They suck. And it's so crazy because when we had that discussion, we were just talking about how, eventually it's going to be left up to the Korean youth as to how they're going to do. And if anything, they're going to be our at least from the fans perspective, our future. So the very night we were complaining about Korea and we laughed it off like we're just trash, so it's okay. It was the very next day where my dad passed away. We found him downstairs and unresponsive, and we had to call an ambulance, and it was absolutely nuts. And what's crazier too is the following day or two, South Korea beat Germany. And a small side quest story from here. Germany is one of my favorite fucking teams in terms of the international football stage. So I was really upset that South Korea didn't do shit until the last fucking match, and Germany completely shit the bed all throughout the World Cup, and they didn't even fucking qualify for the round of 16. So very frustrating, but it was a sign of like, I don't know, like maybe like some divine fucking intervention shit where you're thinking, dude, how the fuck did Korea just beat Germany? I mean, yeah, I get it. Joachim Low was a bit arrogant with the shit, but how the fuck did Korea just beat Germany? So I remember that just being a wild fucking time. And then a year or so later, the under-19 South Korean team got to the World Cup final and lost to, I believe it was Ukraine. Ukraine did phenomenal, and I'm never going to take anything away from what they did, but I was emotional during that final. And even when South Korea lost, I lost it. I was thinking about my dad, and just a year or so before that, it was us shit talking about how fucking terrible South Korea is, how like the younger generation potentially might not get there, but here they were, second place in the under-19 World Cup. I think it was under 21 or under 19. Regardless, it was still a big fucking deal for the South Korean national football team, especially from the youth side. And I just found it crazy that after he passed, like South Korea was climbing up in that sense. And yeah, this is why like I find so much joy in sports, because you just never know what the hell's gonna happen, and crazy things happen like that, where your dad, you were just talking about South Korean football being shit and will never be good, and then all of a sudden they beat one of the best teams in the world, and the very next year the youth steps up and makes it to the second place in the World Cup in the youth division, at least. But it's crazy how shit works. But man, it's wild to think that 2 years later I'm sitting here talking about my dad passing away. And I'm not gonna lie to you, man. I cried before recording this. Being real honest, man. I was listening to 845 Heaven by Drunken Tiger, and the lyrics just fucking killed me. Song just about regret, about, you know, being kind of sad that you couldn't say your last words. And it's one of those songs where at the right time it'll hit you, and it's just gonna fucking punch you in the face, and it totally did. And I honestly needed that. I did, because it reminded me that, man, I may have, you know, a lot of regrets about my dad, but I think he is in a better place. I think he did find peace, I hope, at the end. And I'm always going to have the memories. I'm always going to have those experiences, those conflicts with my dad, but that made me into who I am. And honestly, looking back on it now, I don't think I get here to where I am with this mentality of approaching life without my dad. And that's the greatest gift you can give your child, you know, a way to, in a way, teaching a man how to fish, right? Instead of, you know, giving the fish to the man, or whatever the fucking phrase is. But it's a strange time, man. 2 years later, I still think about him every day. We have a picture of him in the house, you know, right in the kitchen, and I usually stay in the kitchen all the time, so I see his face every fucking day. And it's just crazy how someone who's been in, you know, in your life for a majority of it, not being there anymore, it's rough. It is. So my whole thing is ultimately this: if you can take anything from the story, man, just spend time with your loved ones, especially your parents. Like, they're not going to be around forever. Okay? I miss your dad, but you made me learn about life, and it is maybe because of your absence, but all our conflicts, all our struggles, but the love, like, it made me to who I am. So thanks. And I'm trying not to lose my shit right now. I'm really trying not to lose my shit right now, man, because I don't, you know, as sad as it is, like, I don't really want to fucking, you know, just go on a fucking crying binge in the last, like, minute or two of this fucking episode. So we'll leave it there for now, boys and girls. And on the next episode of the Sky Lounge tomorrow, and it's crazy because I'm actually recording this at like 4 in the fucking morning on June 20th. But tomorrow is the 22nd anniversary of me being in the United States. So yeah, these are two really strange days lined up together. And yeah, when my dad passed 2 years ago, my mom and I were both saying, like, what the fuck are the odds that the day before our 20th anniversary, being in this country, dad passed. We couldn't believe it. And the crazier part too was, you know, when my mom and I came to this country on June 21st, 1998, I mean, we came by ourselves first. My dad came a few months later. So yeah, that is some next level universal irony where we both stayed together, and we're still together, my mom and I. So yeah, man, we're going to talk about this great country that I've been living in for 22 years tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that, children. But that does it for this episode. So, all right, motherfuckers, I appreciate you dropping by. Follow me at the Sky Lounge on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Google Music. And also check out the Sky Lounge on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Until next time, fuck off. Gotta wipe out these fucking snots. Ugh.